Hello, everyone. As you're coming in, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We'll slowly let people come in. We're about halfway there. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. I am not at the Mark Twain House. I am in East Hartford. Uh, so just a few miles east of the Mark Twain House. But let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd like to know. We'd all like to know. I know we have people from Connecticut mostly, but I'm sure we have. Oh, look, we have someone from Denver. Um, it's good to see those locations, Columbia, Maryland. Hi, Emily. I recognize that name. Henrico, Virginia. Yeah, it's good to see people from all over the country. Oh, we have someone from Northern California and a little closer to home in Spring Lake Heights, New Jersey, Washington Heights, NYC, one of my favorite places in the world, New Haven. Okay, Riverside, West Hartford. Oh, hi, Stephanie. Um, all right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm absolutely delighted to host tonight's program for Wild, Beautiful, and Free. First, I need to thank our sponsors. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are happy to honor his memory with all these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. As a nonprofit organization, the Mark Twain House and Museum depends on contributions to share our enriching author programs like Wild, Beautiful, and Free, our education initiatives, and other events with our community. If you can, please consider donating. I'll provide a link in the chat, and any amount is wonderful, whether it's 5 or 10, 20, 100, whatever you can do will help us to continue bringing these awesome programs, our wonderful authors and moderators to you folks. Now, about tonight's program, we're welcoming Sophfronia Scott and Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa for a discussion of Sophfronia's novel Wild, Beautiful, and Free. Our author, Sophfronia Scott, grew up in Lorain, Ohio, a hometown she shares with author Toni Morrison. She holds a BA in English from Harvard and an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She began her career as an award-winning magazine journalist for Time. Since then, she has published a number of novels, including All I Need to Get By and The Secret and the Monk. Currently, Sophfronia is founding director of Alma College's MFA in Creative Writing, a low residency graduate program based in Alma, Michigan. Our moderator, Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa, was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York City. Her novels include Daughters of the Stone and A Woman of Endurance, the former of which was listed as a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. Her work has appeared in several anthologies and literary magazines. Since her retirement as a teacher and librarian, Dahlma continues to dedicate herself to her writing, speaking engagements, panels, and workshops. Now, we encourage you to have a conversation in the chat, but if you have a specific question, you can post it directly into the Q&A section. That's a small button at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A and has two word boxes. So just put your question in there. We don't want it to get lost in the chat. And you can ask a question at any time. You don't have to wait until our Q&A section, which will start in about 35, 40 minutes. You can ask it at any time so you won't forget it. Please also know that you can click on live transcript to see live auto captioning for the program. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I will be putting a link in the chat to purchase Wild, Beautiful, and Free through our museum store. Your purchase will support our museum and our honored guest. Now that's enough from me. I will turn this over to Sophfronia and Dahlma. Please sit back and enjoy the conversation.
Good evening,
Hello,
everyone. So nice to be here with all of you and with you, Sophfronia. Nice to see you again and excited about talking about your new book.
Thank you. And thank you for agreeing to be in conversation with me. And
Absolutely.
I'm excited by all of the people here from all over the country.
Absolutely. That's great. I hope you have lots of questions. But just to explain a little bit about how we're going to move on from here. Well, first of all, let me, before I do anything else, thank the Mark Twain House for inviting us, and Omar for being such a gracious host and giving us the space to talk about a very special historical time period. But before we get to the time period, we'll start with you, Sophfronia, as writer. Then we'll talk a little bit about the book. We'll give you some time to read. And then folks can start asking questions. So we'll start right away and ask you, introduce yourself, Sophfronia. So who is Sophfronia the writer?
And a storyteller, I write both fiction and nonfiction. So when I write nonfiction, I tend to be answering a question, for example, like for The Seeker and the Monk, how do you read Thomas Merton? Or how do I learn to read Thomas Merton? And I can share that. So, well, let me tell you about how I read Thomas Merton. But when I feel that there's something I want to say about the world, something that is on my heart, I tend to write fiction, because to me, that's where you can sort of put something out there that's easier for people to take because it's a story, but it also provides a bigger landscape, right? For me to express things and to delve into issues.
Okay. What have you learned along your journey of writing that you would like to share with us?
Oh, I'm actually in Atlanta today. I'm not at home. I'm in Atlanta, where I've been attending a writers' conference. And I was sitting down with a writer today who is working on her third book. But there's something that she noticed. She'd read my book, and she was feeling that there was something missing, where that she's not a point that she hasn't reached yet as a writer. And she was kind of querying me because she's trying to figure out what that is. And the answer that we arrived at had to do with one's imprinted in you, and recognizing how they come to the fore when you're working on a piece. So for her books have come out very quickly. So she's been about meeting those deadlines and getting the manuscript together and getting it out. And she hasn't had the luxury of time to allow her to really think about, why is she telling this particular story? And can she connect this to something that may even go back to her own childhood, right? To really connect with all of the things that make a person who he or she is, right? And that's what people come to on the page. They see that you're connected to something that nobody else is, right? Because we are all different. We all have our different experiences. So I was explaining to her that some of the things that she was picking up on in reading Wild, Beautiful, and Free were actually certain things that sometimes I don't even realize I'm writing from. That certain, if you want to call them, kind of like wounds that I'm seeking to heal, that I'm working through even from childhood. So for example, I saw Roots when I was 11 years old. And that miniseries, Alex Haley's story of an American family, tracing the story of Kunta Kinte enslaved in Africa all the way up through, you know, the family going through into the late 20th century. And there was a part of that story where Kunta Kinte's daughter has been befriended by the white girl in the house who has taught her how to read. But when it's discovered that Kizzy can read, she is sold away. And to this day, I hear her, I can hear her screaming, Missy Ann, Missy Ann. And I was thinking, oh, there's no way Missy Ann is letting this happen. Why is it Missy Ann coming out? They're probably hiding her so she can't hear Kizzy screams. But then the scene cuts to Missy Ann just sitting there coolly, saying something about Kizzy being stupid, right? And that, Dahlma, I really think that broke my heart as a child. It was like, that woman not stand, that, you know, she was a girl, like an older girl, like teenager, but that she didn't stand up for her friend has been in me all these years. And it wasn't until I was starting to develop the relationship between Jeanette and her half-sister Callista that it occurred to me, oh my gosh, I am trying to redeem Missy Ann. I'm working through that aspect, right? So, but a story can only, but the story probably reads differently because I am bringing that wound to the page, right? And even if somebody else is writing the exact same thing, we're not writing it from the same place.
Right.
So to me, it's about being in touch, you know, even in exploration. Sometimes you don't know what is the thing that's within you that's coming up on the pages you're writing, but to recognize it and then go even deeper. It's like, okay, let's see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there and let it all out that this is the thing that's bugging me. And I think that I am an intuitive writer, and I consider writing a self-exploration, you know, even as I'm telling a story.
It's interesting. I think that when writers do go there, and it takes, I think, a tremendous amount of bravery to explore those wounds in public, so to speak. But I think that readers can feel it and appreciate the fact that this is an authentic feeling, even within fiction. So I think that's one of the things I love about fiction, is that it allows people to touch heart to heart. And I think you did a great job of that.
Thank you. It has been, it's my feeling that if a writer does what they do well enough, that people will read themselves into the story, right? That it's no longer about me and what I'm working through. Other people see themselves in the story. And it's interesting, you know, this book has a lot of reviews on Amazon, and it's interesting to me how many of the reviews reference that there's something that people are seeing in the book that touches them. And that's exciting to me.
Right. And I think since we both write historical fiction, I mean, you could look at it as this happened 100 years ago. What does that have to do? But I think if you tap into the universality of humanity, I think it doesn't matter what time period you're writing about.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now that you brought that up, my next question is, what fascinated you about this particular time period?
Time period fit the story that I wanted to tell, right? So I knew that I wanted, well, let's go back to Jane Eyre, because the novel Jane Eyre inspired this one. So you have Jane Eyre in the early 1800s, a girl who is orphaned, who has no one to stand up for her, and yet has to make her way in the world with no connections, right? Which is almost impossible to do in England at that time. Now, that book had a huge influence on me because it taught me how to have agency. How do you think your way through things? How do you lead your life? And I wanted to create a heroine like that, but to have her be a woman of color, to have a woman have an epic life journey in that way. And so I'm thinking, so what would that look like? a woman who has no place in the world.
Mhm.
So to me, it's like, to make her mixed race, right? Then she would really have no place, right? Because of the lines between black and white. And where are those lines most strictly drawn? And to me, that's during, the 1850s leading into the Civil War. So
Mhm.
it's like, okay, let's put her in that time frame and work through that. And the things that I wanted to say about the land, right, and about connections between people, that seemed to be the time period where a lot of issues were festering in a certain way that I thought would help
Mhm.
the story. So it wasn't a particular um, uh, fascination with that time period. It just fit the story.
Mhm.
But again, thinking about the influences that are already within me, right? I was already steeped in watching a lot of Civil War stuff for some reason when I was a kid. Like that
Mhm.
I loved miniseries when I was young. So I saw North and South, like with Patrick Swayze. Must have seen that a zillion times,
Uh-huh.
right? And that was very Hollywood, like, weird, outsized version. But it was still curious to me because of the lines drawn, right, of bonds broken. and
Mhm.
and even as a kid I could see that there was an epic story being played out across the landscape of our country during that time period. And even in school, in my high school class, it's not like we got very far in history, but the Civil War was one section that we learned pretty well, right? Then I knew the names of battles, right? I understood
Mhm.
what happened at Gettysburg. So it was like I wasn't starting from scratch, right? So it seemed like a good place to be with that book.
Okay. Okay. Um, One of the things that fascinated me about this book is that it's not easily categorized, right? So
Yeah.
it could be described as a neo-slave narrative, right?
Mm,
Or as a woman's search for self-fulfillment,
mhm.
or as a love story, or as an adventure story. How do you think of this book?
Okay, it's all of those things, Dahlma. It's all of those things, really, because if you think about it, right, our lives are never just one thing or another,
Mhm.
right? And as we move through life, one thing has priority over another, right? We get to a certain age and we want love in a certain way, right? We want fulfillment at a certain age, right? We want purpose at a certain age. So, we see Jeanette from the age of 12 growing up into adulthood and trying to make her way in the world. But she is because just the way the facts of her life cause her to have to be an adventurer, right? To stand up for herself in certain ways, right? To figure out how is she going to escape from enslavement, right?
Mhm.
And she has to be daring. So, which was exciting for me to be able to write that, right? To be able to create a heroine who is is not afraid of danger, but knows that it's important, that she can't be fearful if she wants her life to be what she wants it to be.
Okay. Okay. Um,
Can I ask? I mean, I really wanted to, and I think I'm going to read this part from the book as well. Omar mentioned, I'm going to say this for everybody, Omar mentioned Dahlma's book, A Woman of Endurance, which is also a slave narrative. And, I read Dahlma's book and I found it fascinating that we both had sections in the book where the main character is being encouraged away from anger and
mhm.
away from resentment.
Mhm.
And Dahlma, I would really love to talk about why somehow you and I both felt that needed to be in our books.
Well, okay, but you go first. This is
Okay,
highlighting you. Okay.
okay. So Jeanette is sold into slavery. So for those who don't know the book, so Jeanette Bevan is the daughter of an enslaved woman who dies in childbirth and of a plantation owner. And the plantation owner takes Jeanette into his house and raises him raises her as his daughter along with her half sister. But he dies, and his wife, who never liked the idea of Jeanette being in the house in the first place, sells her into slavery and denies Jeanette her inheritance. Now, Jeanette is treated very badly, and in fact is by the guy who brokers the trade, basically beats her into submission to tell her that she must never speak again, because otherwise they will know that she is educated and could cause trouble, and this is a horrible thing. And so she is feeling hatred for the one who sold her. She is, seeing terrible things. She is feeling this growing anger and resentment, and it's also making her look at her own birth story a certain way, right? And so she is very clearly wanting to go down that road of anger. But Fanny, who is the girl that she ends up being housed with, pulls her back from that. And Dahlma, the reason I felt that's important is because I feel that when bad things happen to us, I feel like we do give the perpetrators too much power. And I mean, that's in any everyday, situation where trauma can happen, that I feel like they get too much of us. And I feel that some, when they talk about generational trauma, right, that this trauma of slavery has been passed down, it's like, well, what are you saying? That there's a part of us that cannot truly experience joy? Are you saying that these owners and overseers from hundreds of years ago still have a stake in my life? I don't think so, right? And so to me, that's part of a determination of one taking hold of one's life, is that you don't let them take that part of you. Right. But that was my thinking.
Right. Well, similarly, I felt they can take your body, but they can't take your soul. And so how do you safeguard that part of you? And so one of my characters asks the other characters, are you going to let them win? Because if they have your body and your soul, then they've taken everything from you. And I really believe that you and I and other people of color would not be here today if there weren't some people who refuse to give up that part of themselves. And I don't think it's just, although we're talking here about slave narratives, I don't think that's an exclusive reality to just us. I think all oppressed people, whether it's, in Europe or Africa or Asia or wherever, it's part of our humanity to try to hang on to that sacredness within us.
Exactly.
When we give that up, then we've given up our humanity. So, but
that's why I feel these stories are important, and that people shouldn't shy away from them, because anyone could say, oh, I'm not going to read that book, there's slavery in it, it would be too upsetting. But it's like, no, you have to read it, because there is more than just the dark things that happen. And again, that if you read the reviews from my book, people are noting that, and they are seeing the part that is hope in these books.
And the notion of hopelessness is not something that I can embrace in my writing any more than you would embrace it in yours. So that when people may find certain parts of your book difficult to read, but there is redemption, and there is hope, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm not talking about a Hollywood ending, but just how to deal with this reality that I have been dealt, and still come out being a human being.
Yes.
Okay, so I spoke enough now. I am going to let you have the spotlight and pick something from your work that you would like to share with us. And if you want to, I don't know if you want to start at the beginning or if you want to give us a little intro so that we know where we are in the book, but we'd love to hear it.
Okay. So I'm looking at where we are time-wise. So usually I read from the prologue, but I'm going to read this part that we've just been talking about Fanny and Jeanette. So at this point in the book, Jeanette has been not only been enslaved, and with Fanny, she has been witness to Fanny's rape. And at this point in the book, Fanny is now pregnated with her second child. Her first child didn't survive, but now Fanny's pregnant with her second child. And this is a conversation between the two. By that December, though, Fanny was with child and so sick I couldn't think of leaving her. She threw up every morning, so bad on one day that I made her stay in bed. I worked for both of us. As her baby grew, I felt a resentment growing within me. It was like I was watching my mama and papa's story play out in front of me. My mama having no choice but to take papa into her bed, giving birth to a child who could never have any place to stay in the world. I began to see papa's land for me, petit bévin, to be poor recompense, for it wouldn't have been any better than another form of enslavement. Me living there alone, almost no better than being a kept woman, too light for the notice of some, my light brown hair too rough and nappy, signaling I was in fact too dark to be accepted by the rest. The thought sapped my resolve. Where would I go if I left the Holloway plantation? Would Catalpa Valley, with Madam in charge, really be a better place? I began to see that maybe a better place wasn't anywhere. I might as well stay with Fanny and Aunt Nancy Lynn and Silas. You don't ask me nothing about my baby, Fanny whispered. It was spring. Aunt Nancy Lynn had said the baby would come in the summer. I know where it is, belly against my back every night. What else do I need to know? But I did ask her something. Fanny, where are your mama and papa? Never knew my daddy. My mama looked after me and most of the babies here, taught us how to pick seeds out of the cotton, taught the girls how to sew, made sure we didn't make no trouble. Well, where is she now? Don't rightly know. Ran away when I was about your age. Ran away? My heart thumped hard. They never caught her? Well, they didn't miss her right away. I was working in the big house. Then they figured she would come back because of me. She knew they'd whip me. Fanny, no. She took my hand and put it down the back of her shift. My fingers found the raised cords of flesh on her skin. 2 lashes, she said. Only 2 on account of my being so young. Corinne in the kitchen got 5 for spilling a glass of water on one of Massa Holloway's dinner guests. So I was glad it was only 2. Don't it make you mad? Mad about what? Mad my mama left? About getting whipped? That's the way things are. What good would it do to be mad? I'd have to be mad every day. I touched her back again. I'm mad every day, I said. You've been used to a different life, that's all. Now I can tell you what I'd be mad at. What? If you let all that being mad turn you into something else, like a different girl from when you come here. That girl, she's special. How do you know? Fanny made me turn around to face her. Tell me about your mama and your daddy. Nothing to say. My mama was And suddenly I couldn't say the word. I hadn't known the meaning of it before, the true meaning of it, until I come to the Holloway plantation. Slave, not human, less than nothing. Like us, I said finally. Your papa didn't treat her that way. How you know? I know you. I shifted on the pallet. My baby gonna be birthed right here on this pallet. Where were you born? Where'd your mama die? In the big house? Yeah, that's what I figured. Your feet never touched the dirt in the colored's quarters. How'd he raise you? In the house with his wife and daughter? Uh-huh. Bet his missus pitched a fit about that. And the first words out of your mouth when I asked who you were, you just going on about being his daughter and talking about his land. Why you know all of that? He told me. He wanted me to know. I stopped. Tears slid from the corners of my eyes. What did he want you to know, Jeanette? That he loved me. That he loved my mama. That's right. But my mama didn't have a choice. She didn't get to love who she wanted. What does that make me? Fanny placed a cool hand on my forehead. You can't know your mama's mind, she said. Only what you know, your daddy's love. Now you can go around here feeling bad like I seen you doing, or you can walk like you loved. Nobody can touch that, not even Everett. I know my mama, God rest her soul, loved me. I think about her, how she wouldn't want me to suffer no matter how bad things are. That's what gets me through whenever it is on top of me. It's what's keeping me going now, thinking about how I can protect my baby and let him or her know they loved. That's all I can do. It makes me mad, Fanny. Feel like the anger like a wild animal on me, like Everett always on top of me, even though he's on you. If you were my child, I'd say you mad because you can't talk. Got everything bottled up in you like an old jar, canned collards, rotten because it never got opened. I put a hand to my eyes and felt the tears running down my face. I miss Papa. She put her arms around me. He's still here. You his girl. I thought about what Dorinda had once said, how I looked just like him, like he had spat me out. What would you do, Jeanette? I mean, if you were him right now, what you be doing? I'd be working hard and planning, making lots of plans. For what? Making sure his family was safe, protected. Uh-huh. Sounds like he doing something else too. Well, what's that? Loving. Sounds like a man spending more time doing that than being mad. I don't know what he had to be mad at, but you do know what he had to love. Just act like that for a while. See where it takes you. And that's the end of that section.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Okay, I'm wondering if we should stop for a minute and take a look at some of the questions that some of our guests may have.
Oh, okay.
Yes. We have a question from Anne Michelle that is asking, I would like to know how long you spent researching your story, and also how long you spent writing.
Okay. So this book was on my mind for a long time. I mean, for years. But once I really started writing it, it probably took about a year, a little over a year, because I was stuck for a long time when I came to having to write the slavery part. I mean, really stuck. And it occurred to me I was stuck because I didn't want to, I felt like I was wanting to write something different. I didn't realize that I was stuck because I didn't want to write what is usually written in a slave narrative. But it took me a long time to realize that that was why I was stuck and feel empowered to write something else. So I did that. But the research piece, I don't research a lot beforehand. So as I mentioned, I knew the Civil War in general. So what I do is I get what information I need to start the story. So the story starts with a plantation in Louisiana. So I'm going to figure out what plantations in Louisiana were like, what was sugarcane like, what was, I'm going to do that research. Then I'm going to, tell the story. And then I stop when I need research for when I get to that point, right? So for example, when I get to the Civil War sections, I'm thinking about, okay, which battles do I want to use here? And going through and looking at the Civil War battle by battle, where would a battle fit in here? Where can I tell the story of this battle accurately to have it fit in with Jeanette's story? And then I will sit down and do the research of that particular battle, right? And in that research, I'm thinking about, okay, she becomes a nurse. So let me read about the Black women who were nurses during the Civil War. And in that research, I discover a woman who I call Mother B, who was someone who did oversee nurses in the Union Army. So I was like, oh, that would be cool. Let's have her as a real figure in here. So I'm kind of researching all along the way as I go. Because usually when I stop and get stuck, it's usually because I know that I'm missing something. I'm missing information. I'm also someone who, I was trained in research as a journalist, so going all the way back to my career as a journalist. So that is also has been my habit just from work, that I research as I go along. It's not like I have a luxury of doing all this research and then, going into the piece. And I find it's easier that way because some writers do get bogged down in research and never get to telling the story.
Mm.
Excellent. It doesn't look like we have any more questions for now.
Okay, well, I always have other questions. So
Yeah, go for it, Dahlma.
So until we get more questions from the audience, I call this a neo-slave narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In what ways would you think this is different than the traditional slave narratives that we know of from the 19th century?
Oh, okay. So this is why I was stuck, Dahlma. I was stuck for the longest time and I didn't know why. And I realized it was because I didn't want to tell the traditional slave narrative. So here's the example. Like I knew Jeanette was going to escape, that somehow she was going to escape. But in my mind, I kept seeing the story that I've always seen, an image of someone running through the woods, possibly dogs chasing them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like, and that story didn't feel empowering to me. So, but I didn't know what the alternative would be. And I didn't realize that was why I was stuck, but I just didn't want to write that. I was resisting it. So in my research, so I'm reading, I found a book called Runaway Slaves. It was this little book that I found at the bookstore sale at my local library. And Runaway Slaves is a series of narratives about people, slaves talking about how they ran away.
Mm-hmm.
And I found in it the story of William and Ellen Craft. And here's a funny coincidence. There was a book, it's called Husband, Slave, Master, oh gosh, Master, Wife, something like that. It just came out like last month. That whole book is about William and Ellen Craft. So they were husband and wife enslaved, but they were able to escape because she was light enough to pass for white, and they dressed her up as a man who was ailing, and they pretended her husband was her slave, and they traveled that way. And she was a seamstress, so she was able to make a rough version of male clothes. And so And they did that. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And it was scary, you know, because it could have been caught at any moment. But as I was reading that, I realized I felt excited by that narrative, right? I felt excited. I felt empowered. And I said, okay, this I can tell. I'm going to use this. This is the story that I can tell. I can see it, and it would fit with Jeanette, and it would allow me to work in the character of Silas. And it was just, that was exciting to me. Something similar happened with when I visited Louisiana, when I was working on the book in the revision stage, and I went to the Whitney plantation, and I learned about a slave riot that had happened in that area, 500 slaves, and it had a terrible ending, right? The leaders of that rebellion were caught, they were beheaded, and their heads put on pikes all along the Mississippi River. But in the research, the wonderful the library, I mean the bookstore, like they have a lot of resources at the Whitney plantation, and in other places throughout New Orleans. I learned two things, Dahlma. I realized that, number one, there were way more slave revolts than we're taught, right? We know about Nat Turner, and that's it.
Right.
And also that slaves were escaping all the time. And it wasn't just people like running through woods. And somehow that just made me feel hopeful. It made me feel excited. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much that we aren't told. That's why I'm fascinated by the 1619 project that the New York Times has done, and it's continuing to work on. That's exciting to me, that we have been limited, even in the story of slavery. We have been limited, and in a way that has made us feel limited. And so it was exciting to me to say, okay, let's take the empowering pieces from this narrative. And I found that I could write about that I was moving full steam ahead after that.
Thank you. Your words made me think of Chinananda Adichie, who writes about the tyranny of the one story.
Yes.
And, we've always been told this one story, usually about a male slave who runs away and is caught and runs away and is caught or whatever. Yes. And what I find fascinating about the neo-slave narratives that we have today is that there are so many different stories. It's also interesting to me that there's this movement to limit the stories, to erase the stories. And I think that the more people try to do that, the more stories will be created, because until it is acknowledged, it's just like a festering sore, and we really need to address it.
Yeah.
But let me get off my soapbox. One of the things.
I want to say, Dahlma, there's another story. Like, I've only recently found out about this, and I'm curious about it. And I don't know if you know anything about it, but who was it? There was someone who was telling me about, we always hear about Underground Railroad up north, right? Like in, Pennsylvania, Ohio, all these places. And I recently learned that the Underground Railroad was in the South, like in areas like Texas, and that there were slaves that fled south and went into Mexico. Like, okay, I don't know about you. I don't know those narratives. I've never heard about what happened to those slaves, right? But it makes sense, right? It must have happened. So to me, it's those missing pieces, right? I think it's important to tell, to recognize that we only have this much of the picture when it's like so huge.
Absolutely. It had to be, because there were so many people involved. They couldn't have possibly all had the same experience. Yes, even in Afrofuturism and science fiction, we find slave narratives that are so different. Like in Butler's the Kindred. You have modern day interracial couple go through a time warp, and they end up with them being living during the Civil War, and the husband having to pretend that he was the master and his wife was his slave. And can you imagine what that would do to a modern couple having to take on those roles?
Yeah.
So I thought it was just an amazing novel.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things that I find that it is fun, but is also very helpful, is to cast my characters, right?
Mhm.
So if you were going to cast Jeanette and Mr. Colchester and Nancy Lynn and Madame Bilban and the founder, who would you cast them as? And this question comes to me because I was a teacher for many years, right? And
Right.
kids found it much easier if I said, well, you see this character, think of like maybe Tom Hanks being that character,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you could cast your movie of this novel, who do you think would be good actors for these parts?
You know, I had a hard time with that question, Dahlma, because how many would it be a situation where we really would have a mixed race actor and actress, or would we be having white or Italian or Greek actors pretending to be mixed race? Do you see the difficulty, right?
Right. It
Um,
depends who's doing the casting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so, and also, those actors aren't recognizable names,
Right.
right? So there's a movie called Eve's Bayou that
Yes.
came out. I love Eve's Bayou. It came out
Wonderful
several
movie.
years ago. So, you know, so there are people like oh, I think her name was Smollett, Journey Smollett, who played Eve, and as a girl then. So, you know, I think of actors from that movie, and the guy who played the actor who kills Samuel L. Jackson in that movie. You know, it's like those actors have those roles, but we don't see them every day. So, you
No.
know, I can't, you know, even if I told you that guy's name, you wouldn't know it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So we would really have to, you know, roll out some different actors for this.
Right.
But I do think about, I love Octavia Spencer, right? So of course, you know, she would be Aunt Nancy Lynn to me, right? And Madam, of course. Oh, the woman who oh, Allison Janney, who is so, she was in The Help, and Allison Janney can be scary, right? She can be so scary, and so I think she would do a really good job of being Madam.
Right. It's interesting how much difficulty we might have today casting when we supposedly have a much better environment in Hollywood with so many more Black actors, and we still can't come up with enough recognizable names
No, because
to cast it.
yeah, we
So
don't have that range.
there's we have a long way to go on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So the question always comes up, two questions. Well, first of all, when you were a kid, who were your favorite writers?
Oh goodness. So if we're talking about when I was a kid, well, first of all, I read Jane Eyre when I was 13, right?
Okay.
So I was very much steeped in British writers. I read A Tale of Two Cities. I was all over, you know, Pride and Prejudice. But if you go back even younger, the Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, I read that when I was like probably second, third grade. So those were the earliest books. But even before that, John Ezra Keats, The Snowy Day, right? those books Whistle for Willie, right? And
I
I just
see your
still,
face light up already.
yeah,
So,
yes.
so reading was pivotal in your life from a very young child.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm also, my face is lighting up because I'm also remembering just the joy of being able to share those John Ezra Keats books with my son, right? And I have a book, you know, he had a board book version of that, and I still have a picture of him as a baby, like waving that book, and you know, just yeah,
Okay.
it's when you can pass on that love, that's exciting.
And what about the other end? What of the recent books that you've read, which stand out as wonderful reading experiences for you?
You know, I just finished Britt Bennett's book, The Vanishing Half, right? About the twin sisters and one of them who ends up passing for white. And I was, and it's very different from her book, The Mothers. You know, I saw a growth in her writing since from that first book to this next one. And I loved the way she drew those characters and kept the story tense and energetic throughout, even when she had moved from one generation to the next, and you have a whole different set of characters, right? That was absolutely fascinating. I also read recently, you know, going backwards in time, Nella Larson's book Passing, right? Which is on a certain level a similar story, except it's two childhood friends, and one of them ends up passing for white. So, so it was like Nella Larson took that story to a certain point, and then Britt Bennett took it the rest of the way. So it was really cool to read them together at the same time.
And the movie Passing was really interesting. Great visual. Yeah. So we probably have a lot of emerging writers listening to us today. And the question always comes up, what advice would you give to an emerging writer?
I'm chewing on my eyes. This was something else that came up at the conference today about being committed to your work, to your writing, you know, that you have to find a way to make time for it. And, but at the end of the day, we all have the same amount of time. Like we all have 24 hours in the day, but the things that we do are what makes the difference. You know, I choose to do this with my time. Someone else chooses to do that. And if this is something you really want to do, then you must figure out a way to make time for it, right? And you have to find your own rhythm with it. So for some people, it is writing every day, that they must write every single day. You know, for me, I'm more project oriented. You know, I'll get into a project and then I'll be writing every day on that project. But once the project's done, I may not write for a month, right? But you have to find that commitment and that love, and it has to be important enough that you will move mountains for it. Because otherwise you will continue, you can always talk about a story and you will continue talking about it. And but that won't put the book on the page.
Okay, thank you. Omar, do we have some more questions?
We do. We might have covered them already. Someone, Gail is asking if, rhetorically speaking, who would you say your audience is and why? We kind of covered that with the genre, but I don't know if there's anything more to be said with that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Omar, because I don't always think in terms of audience. That I think the publisher does that, especially when, you know, they have to put it in a certain place, like, okay, this book is historical fiction, and giving it a certain look, and marketing it out there, you know. But at the same time, I am a person with a marketing brain, and I know that you can't say, oh, this book is for everyone, right? So if I had to say, you know, my reader would be mostly women, although again, if you look at the reviews for this book, there are some reason there are quite a number of men reading this book.
Mhm.
But I think it could be a person looking for themselves, right? Looking to somehow find affirmation in a book, right? To not read something just to be reading it, but to find, to be surprised by hope, right? And it's not like you can sit down and say, okay, today I'm going to write a book about hope, right?
Mhm.
But I can write what I have to offer and hope that it will find the people who need to hear or see themselves in the narrative.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, that's amazing. Phoebe sort of has a question, and Dahlma maybe covered it a little bit or touched upon it for a second. How frustrated are you with the changes in the education system in some parts of the country, with enslaved people being called immigrants in some? So I guess the usage of the manipulation of words um, in our connected to literature.
Yeah, I'm not clear on what that question is, but to me there is a certain frustration around making such changes, because to me it's another way of trying to control the narrative, right? And to limit, right? If we change words, we change the story, right? And it sounds like that's what's going on. So when these things happen, I mean, to me, it's not just about being upset about it, but it makes me curious. Why is this so important? Why do you feel the need to do this? And to really, I want someone to come forward and I'm not sure someone would, but to see to understand what they're putting out there, right? To face the fact that they are trying to limit someone and why that is. And not that somebody, whoever is doing this, would want to admit to it, but I want to crack open a dialogue, right? It just seems so strange to me, the things that come up and when they do come up. And I just want to say, what is really going on here? I can't do any better than that, but that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. We've reached the end. Dahlma, is there any question that you have before we close things out?
I had one and it's like flirting around the edges of my mind. I don't know where it went.
Well, but while you're thinking about that, I'm going to answer this question that's in the chat.
Mhm.
Robert is asking, did wide Sargasso Sea have any influence on the book? And I will say no, it didn't. Just because that book is based on a character who really doesn't show up in my version. Like, there's no representation of that character in my book. And if you read the book, you'll see. I don't want to give away the secrets, but you'll see that character really isn't there. I do know that book. I know Wide Sargasso Sea, but it wasn't a particular influence.
Okay, my last is not a question, but an observation. One of the things that I love about the book is the sense of the world not being just black and white. That means extremes, right? All the characters are multi-layered. They have different, apart of course from the racial black and white situation. But I think that in today's world, people want simple answers, and we are not simple people. And so I really appreciate the nuances and the unexpected aspects of character, of plot, that it isn't just simply, well, she's black and he's white, and they have this problem and they don't know how to solve it. But the fact that so many people in this book are not easily categorized, so many of the characters, I think makes it a really good novel to study in terms of how it reflects our society.
Mm. Thank you, Dahlma. That's like the best compliment anyone could give my book. So thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for writing it. Omar, back to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Sophfronia and Dahlma. This has been a really inspiring conversation. So looking forward to reading both of your books. And thank you so much to our audience for your questions and for your ears. If you want to buy Sophfronia's book, you can do so through our museum store. There's a link in the chat, but you can also go to our website. And you can also join us for future virtual programs. This Thursday, we'll have a few days of trouble, which is about Reverend Wheeler Parker Jr.'s testimony as the last surviving witness to the lynching of Emmett Till. And on April 4th, you can join us in person or online for Dispatches from Puerto Nowhere, a story about a Puerto Rican family's efforts to assimilate that led to the near complete erasure of their heritage, culture, and language within 2 generations. That is all from us. Yes, Sophfronia?
Hey, Omar, yeah, I just wanted to remind them that if they buy the book through the museum, they get a signed book plate, correct?
Yes, they do.
So you'll get an autographed book.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening.
All right.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Omar. Thanks, Dahlma.
Thank
You, everyone.
Good night.
Take care.